Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I need to take a minute to thank everyone who has been listening to the show since it started back in 2019. To those people who have listened, shared, and supported the show in many wonderful and kind ways, the podcast is still around thanks to you. What I'd really like to ask for at this time of year where people are often stressed out or very busy with the business of celebration is for you to spread the word. I don't advertise. I'm not sure how I could effectively advertise. So I need your help to help me grow the show and to reach new people. There are a lot of people out there struggling to sleep, so if you know someone cranky and listless thanks to their struggles, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales. And if you tell people on social media, please make sure to tag me in. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter, so I can see and I can thank you. If you'd like to support Sleepy Time Tales in other ways, like, for example, backing it on Patreon, that would be really helpful as well. Patreon is a monthly support system that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can get you fun bonuses based on how much you contribute. And there are goal-based bonuses that go out to all listeners when we reach those goals. But if monthly seems like a big ask, then you can make once-off tips through buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales or the tip jar on the website. I've also got some basic merchandise in a TeePublic store which you can purchase to the show notes or via the website at merch.sleepytimetales.net. And not only is there Sleepy Time Tales merchandise there, but I've shared the works from some other fun creators that I thought would be cool to give some exposure to. And last but not least, of course, I need to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. The music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. Thank you for taking the time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But in 2021, the lack of sleep is a health crisis, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. Or maybe sometimes background noise or even company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you without any pressure of the end coming. Now, as far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage. The primary idea behind Sleepy Time Tales is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something a bit different. Maybe you just need something in the background. These days, well, actually traditionally, people often liked the television or the radio. In this day and age, maybe you would listen to streaming music or YouTube. Some people like the sound of the wind in the trees or rain or the sound of the ocean. And maybe for you, the key is some boring dude just droning on in the background. But however you're engaging with it, it's important that you don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now obviously I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it probably won't work for you. I suggest giving it a good solid 3 nights try. If by the end of that it's not working, then maybe I'm not the guy for you. But it can probably take as long as that to get over the sort of resistance. The idea of getting used to listening to my voice, the sound of my accent, or maybe just the strangeness of the idea of trusting someone to speak to you while you're sleeping. Also, maybe one episode isn't long enough. Maybe you need a little bit more time, or maybe your problem isn't so much the going to sleep. Maybe you wake up in the middle of the night. What I recommend doing, because it's what works for me, is to let the podcast run all night. With the stuff that I listen to, I download enough episodes to make sure that I can get through the night, pop my earbuds in when I go back to sleep, and I'm usually out pretty quickly. But then I wake up again at 3 a.m. and when I realize I'm awake, I pop the earbuds back in and whoop, straight back to sleep again. I even suggest that you can do the same thing later in the night, or rather later in the morning. If you wake up 60 minutes or even 30 minutes before the alarm, try the same thing. And you may wonder what the point is. After all, what is 30 minutes sleep in the context of a whole night if you've been struggling? But I've had people thank me for suggesting they try this because there is something about allowing yourself deep relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new level. So however you're engaging with it, whenever you're listening to it, whenever you're finding it the most useful, it's very important as you listen to Sleepy Time Tales to just try relax. This, I'm sure, seems a bit strange to you at first, so just try relax and give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you wouldn't be hearing me, except maybe in a dream. From the Time of the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. The Coming of the Sea. Once there was no sea, and the gods went walking over the green plains of earth. Upon an evening of the forgotten years, the gods were seated on the hills, and all the rivers of the world lay coiled at their feet to sleep. When Slid, the new god, striding through the stars, came suddenly upon earth, lying in a corner of space. And behind Slid there marched 1,000,000 waves, all following Slid and tramping up the twilight. And Slid touched earth in one of her great green valleys that divide the south, and here he encamped for the night with all his waves about him. But to the gods as they sat upon their hilltops, a new cry came crying over the green spaces that lay below the hills, and the gods said, "This is neither the cry of life, nor yet the whisper of death. What is this new cry that the gods have never commanded, yet which comes to the ears of the gods?" And the gods together shouting made the cry of the south, calling the south wind to them. And again the gods shouted all together, making the cry of the north, calling the north wind to them. And thus they gathered to them all their winds, and sent those four down into the low plains, to find what thing it was that called with the new cry, and to drive it away from the gods. And then all the winds harnessed up their clouds, and drove forth till they came to the great green valley that divides the south in twain, and there found Slid with all his waves about him. Then for a space Slid and the four winds struggled with one another, till the strength of the winds was gone, and they limped back to the gods, their masters, and said, "We have met this new thing that has come upon the earth, and have striven against its armies, but could not drive them forth. And the new thing is beautiful, but very angry, and is creeping towards the gods." But Slid advanced and led his armies up the valley, and inch by inch and mile by mile he conquered the lands of the gods. Then from their hills the gods sent down a great array of cliffs against hard red rocks and bade them march against Slid. And the cliffs marched down till they came and stood before Slid and leaned their heads forward and frowned and stood staunch to guard the lands of the gods against the might of the sea, shutting Slid off from the world. Then Slid sent some of his smaller waves to search out what stood against him, and the cliffs shattered them. But Slid went back and gathered together a horde of his greatest waves and hurled them against the cliffs, and the cliffs shattered them. And again Slid called up out of his deep a mighty array of waves and sent them roaring against the guardians of the gods, and the red rocks frowned and smote them. And once again Slid gathered his greater waves and hurled them against the cliff. And when the waves were scattered like those before them, the feet of the cliffs were no longer standing firm, and their faces were scarred and battered. Then into every cliff that stood in the rocks Slid sent his hugest wave, and others followed behind it. And Slid himself seized hold of huge rocks with his claws and tore them down and stamped them under his feet. And when the tumult was over, the sea had won, and over the broken remnants of those red cliffs the armies of Slid marched on and up the green long valley. Then the gods heard Slid exulting far away and singing songs of triumph over their battered cliffs, and ever the tramp of his army sounded nearer and nearer in the listening ears of the gods. Then the gods called to their downlands to save their world from Slid, and the downlands gathered themselves and marched away, a great white line of gleaming cliffs, and halted before Slid. Then Slid advanced no more and lulled his legions, and while his waves were low, he softly crooned a song such as once long ago had troubled the stars, and brought down tears out of the twilight. Sternly the white cliffs stood on guard to save the world of the gods, but the song that once had troubled the stars went moaning on awakening pent desires, till full at the feet of the gods the melody fell. Then the blue rivers that lay cold asleep opened their gleaming eyes, uncurled themselves and shook their rushes, and making a stir among the hills crept down to find the sea. And passing across the world they came at last to where the white cliffs stood, and coming behind them, split them here and there, and went through their broken ranks to Slid at last. And the gods were angry with their traitorous streams. Then Slid ceased from singing the song that lures the world, and gathered up his legions, and the rivers lifted up their heads with the waves, and all went marching on to assail the cliffs of the gods. And wherever the rivers had broken the ranks of the cliffs, Slid's army went surging in and broke them up into islands and shattered the islands away. And the gods on the hilltops heard once more the voice of Slid exulting over their cliffs. Already more than half the world lay subject to Slid, and still his armies advanced, and the people of Slid, the fishes and the long eels, went in and out of arbours that once were dear to the gods. Then the gods feared for their dominion, and to their innermost sacred recesses of the mountains, to the very heart of the hills, the gods trooped off together. And there found Tintagon, a mountain of black marble, staring far over the earth, and spake thus to him with the voices of the gods. O eldest born of our mountains, when first we devised the earth, we made thee, and thereafter fashioned fields and hollows, valleys and other hills to lie about thy feet. And now, Tintagon, thine ancient lords, the gods, are facing a new thing which overthrows the old. Go therefore, thou Tintagon, and stand up against Slid, that the gods be still the gods, and the earth still green. And hearing the voices of his sires, the older gods, Tintagon strode down through the evening, leaving a wake of twilight broad behind him as he strode. And going across the green earth came down to Ambrady at the valley's edge, and there met the foremost of Slid's fierce armies, conquering the world. And against him Slid hurled the force of a whole bay, which lashed itself high over Tintagon's knees and streamed down his flanks, and then fell and was lost. Tintagon still stood firm for the honour and dominion of his lords, the elder gods. Then Slid went to Tintagon and said, Let us now make a truce. Stand thou back from Ambrady, and let me pass through thy ranks, that mine armies may now pass up the valley which opens on the world, that the green earth that dreams around the feet of older gods shall know the new god Slid. Then shall mine army strive with thee no more, and thou and I shall be the equal lords of the whole earth, when all the world is singing the chaunt of Slid, and thy head alone shall be lifted above mine armies when thine rival hills are dead. And I will deck thee with all the robes of the sea, and all the plunder that I have taken in rare cities shall be piled before thy feet. Tintagon, I have conquered all the stars, my song swells through all space besides. I come victorious from Marn and Carnagat on the furthest edges of the worlds, and thou and I are to be equal lords when the old gods are gone, and the green earth knoweth Slid. Behold me gleaming azure and fair, with 1,000 smiles and swayed by 1,000 moods. And Tintagon answered, I am staunch and black, and have one mood, and this, to defend my masters and their green earth. Then Slid went backwards growling, and summoned together the waves of a whole sea, and sent them singing full in Tintagon's face. Then from Tintagon's marble front the sea fell backwards, crying out onto a broken shore, and ripple by ripple straggled back to Slid, saying, Tintagon stands. Far out beyond the battered shore that lay at Tintagon's feet, Slid rested long and sent the Nautilus to drift up and down before Tintagon's eyes. And he and his armies sat singing idle songs of dreamy islands far away to the south, and of the still stars whence they had stolen forth, out of twilight evenings and of long ago. Still Tintagon stood with his feet planted fair upon the valley's edge, defending the gods and their green earth against the sea. And all the while that Slid sang his songs and played with the Nautilus that sailed up and down, he gathered his oceans together. One morning, as Slid sang of old outrageous wars and of the most enchanting peace and of dreamy islands and the south wind and the sun, he suddenly launched 5 oceans out of the deep, all to attack Tintagon. And the 5 oceans sprang upon Tintagon and passed above his head. One by one the grip of the oceans loosened, one by one they fell back into the deep, and still Tintagon stood. And on that morning the might of all 5 oceans lay dead at Tintagon's feet. That which Slid had conquered he still held, and there is now no longer a great green valley in the south. But all that Tintagon had guarded against Slid he gave back to the gods. Very calm the sea lies now about Tintagon's feet, where he stands all black amid crumbled cliffs of white, with red rocks piled about his feet. And often the sea retreats far out along the shore, and often wave by wave comes marching in with the sound of the tramping of armies, that all may still remember the great fight that surged about Tintagon once, when he guarded the gods and the green earth against Slid. Sometimes in their dreams the war-scarred warriors of Slid still lift their heads and cry their battle cry. Then do dark clouds gather about Tintagon's swarthy brow, and he stands out menacing, seen afar by ships, where once he conquered Slid. And the gods know well that while Tintagon stands, they and their world are safe, and where the Slid shall one day smite Tintagon is hidden among the secrets of the sea. From Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. A Legend of the Dawn. When the worlds and all began, the gods were stern and old, and they saw the beginning from under eyebrows hoar with years. All but Inzana, their child, who played with the golden ball. Inzana was the child of all the gods, and the law before the beginning and thereafter was that all should obey the gods. Yet hither and thither went all Pegana's gods to obey the Dawn Child, because she loved to be obeyed. It was dark all over the world, and even in Pegana, where dwelt the gods, it was dark, when the child Inzana, the Dawn, first found her golden ball. Then running down the stairway of the gods with tripping feet, Chalcedony, onyx, step by step she cast her golden ball across the sky. The golden ball went bounding up the sky, and the Dawn Child, with her flaring hair, stood laughing upon the stairway of the gods, and it was day. So gleaming fields below saw the first of the days, and the gods have destined. But towards evening, certain mountains, afar and aloof, conspired together to stand between the world and the golden ball, and to wrap their crags about it, and to shut it from the world. And all the world was darkened with their plot. And the Dawn Child up in Pegana cried for her golden ball. Then all the gods came down the stairway right to Pegana's gate to see what ailed the Dawnchild, and to ask her why she cried. Then Inzana said that her golden ball had been taken away and hidden by mountains black and ugly, far away from Pegana, all in a world of rocks under the rim of the sky, and she wanted her golden ball and could not love the dark. Thereat, Umborodom, whose hound was the thunder, took his hound in leash and strode away across the sky after the golden ball, until he came to the mountains afar and aloof. There did the thunder put his nose to the rocks and bay along the valleys, and fast at his heels followed Umborodom, and the nearer the hound the thunder came to the golden ball, the louder did he bay. But haughty and silent stood the mountains, whose plot had darkened the world. All in the dark among the crags in a mighty cavern guarded by two twin peaks, at last they found the golden ball for which the Dawnchild wept. Then under the world went Umborodom, with his thunder panting behind him, and came in the dark before the morning from underneath the world, and gave the Dawnchild back her golden ball. And Inzana laughed and took it in her hands, and Umborodom went back into Pegana, and at its threshold the thunder went to sleep. Again the Dawnchild tossed the golden ball far up into the blue across the sky, and the second morning shone upon the world, on lakes and oceans and on drops of dew. But as the ball went bounding on its way, the prowling mists and the rain conspired together and took it and wrapped it in their tattered cloaks and carried it away. And through the rents in their garments gleamed the golden ball, but they held it fast and carried it right away and underneath the world. Then on an onyx step Inzana sat down and wept, who could no more be happy without her golden ball. And again the gods were sorry, and the south wind came to tell her tales of most enchanted islands, to whom she listened not, nor yet to the tales of temples and lone lands that the east wind told her, who had stood beside her where she flung her golden ball. But from far away the west wind came with news of three grey travellers wrapped around with battered cloaks that carried away between them a golden ball. Then up leapt the north wind, he who guards the pole, and drew his sword of ice out of his scabbard of snow and sped away along the road that leads across the blue. And in the darkness underneath the world he met the three grey travellers and rushed upon them and drove them far before him, smiting them with his sword till their grey cloaks streamed with blood. And out of the midst of them, as they fled with flapping cloaks all red and grey and tattered, he leapt up with the golden ball and gave it to the Dawnchild. Again Inzana tossed the ball into the sky, making the third day, and up it went and fell across the fields. And as Inzana stooped to pick it up, she suddenly heard the singing of all the birds that were. All the birds in the world were singing all together, and also all the streams, and Inzana sat and listened and thought of no golden ball, nor ever of Chalcedonian onyx, nor of all her fathers the gods, but only of all the birds. Then in the woods and meadows where they all suddenly sung, they suddenly ceased. And Inzana, looking up, found her ball was lost, and all alone in the stillness one owl laughed. When the gods heard Inzana crying for her ball, they clustered together on the threshold and peered into the dark, but saw no golden ball. And leaning forward, they cried out to the bat as he passed up and down, "Bat that seest all things, where is the golden ball?" And though the bat answered, none heard, and none of the winds had seen it, nor any of the birds, and there was only the eyes of the gods in the darkness peering for the golden ball. Then said the gods, "Thou hast lost thy golden ball." And they made her a moon of silver to roll about the sky. And the child cried and threw it upon the stairway and chipped and broke its edges and asked for the golden ball. And Limpang Tung, the lord of music, who was the least of all the gods because the child cried still for her golden ball, stole out of Pegana and crept across the sky and found the birds of all the world sitting in trees and ivy and whispering in the dark. He asked them one by one for news of the golden ball. Some had last seen it on a neighbouring hill, and others in trees, though none knew where it was. A heron had seen it lying in a pond, but a wild duck in some reeds had seen it last as she came home across the hills, and then it was rolling very far away. At last the cock cried out that he had seen it lying beneath the world. There Limpang Tung sought it, and the cock called to him through the darkness as he went, until he found the golden ball. Then Limpang Tung went up into Pagana and gave it to the dawn child, who played with the moon no more. And the cock and all his tribe cried out, "We found it, we found the golden ball." Again Nzana tossed the ball afar, laughing with joy to see it. Her hand stretched upwards, her golden hair afloat, and carefully she watched it as it fell. But alas, it fell with a splash into the great sea, and gleamed and shimmered as it fell till the waters became dark above it, and could be seen no more. And men on the world said, "How the dew has fallen, and how the mist set in with breezes from the streams." But the dew was the tears of the dawn child, and the mists were her sighs, when she said, "There will no more come a time when I play with my ball again, for now it is lost forever." And the gods tried to comfort Nzana as she played with the silver moon, but she would not hear them, and went in tears to Slid, where he played with gleaming sails, and in his mighty treasury turned over gems and pearls and lorded it over the sea. And she said, "O Slid, whose soul is in the sea, bring back my golden ball." And Slid stood up, swarthy and clad in seaweed, and mightily dived from the last Chalcedine step out of Pagana's threshold, straight into the ocean. There on the sand among the battered navies of the Nautilus and broken weapons of the swordfish, hidden by dark water, he found the golden ball. And coming up in the night all green and dripping, he carried it gleaming to the stairway of the gods, and brought it back to Nzana from the sea. And out of the hands of Slid she took it, and tossed it far and wide over his sails and sea, and far away it shone on lands that knew not Slid, till it came to its zenith and dropped towards the world. But ere it fell, the eclipse dashed out from his hiding, and rushed at the golden ball, and seized it with his jaws. When Nzana saw the eclipse bearing her plaything away, she cried aloud to Thunder, who burst from Pagana and fell howling upon the throat of Eclipse, who dropped the golden ball and let it fall towards the earth. But the black mountains disguised themselves as snow as the golden ball fell down towards them. They turned their peaks to ruby crimson, and their lakes to sapphires gleaming amongst silver, and Nzana saw a jeweled casket into which her plaything fell. But when she stooped to pick it up again, she found no jeweled casket with rubies, silvers, or sapphires, but only wicked mountains disguised in snow that had trapped her golden ball. And then she cried, because there was none to find it, for Thunder was far away chasing the eclipse, and all the gods lamented when they saw her sorrow. And Limpang Tung, who was least of all the gods, was yet the saddest at the dawn child's grief. And when the gods said, "Play with your silver moon," he stepped lightly from the rest, and coming down the stairway of the gods, playing an instrument of music, went out towards the world to find the golden ball, because Nzama wept. And into the world he went, till he came to the nether cliffs that stand by the inner mountains in the soul and heart of the earth, where the earthquake dwelleth alone, asleep but astir as he sleeps, breathing and moving his legs and grunting aloud in the dark. Then in the ear of the earthquake, Limpang Tung said a word that only the gods may say, and the earthquake started to his feet and flung the cave away, the cave wherein he slept between the cliffs, and shook himself and went galloping abroad, and overturned the mountains that hid the golden ball, and bit the earth beneath them, and hurled the crags about, and covered himself with rocks and fallen hills, and went back ravening and growling to the soul of the earth, and there lay down and slept again for 100 years. And the golden ball rolled free, passing under the shattered earth, so rolled back to Pagana, and Limpang Tung came home to the onyx step, and took the dawn child by the hand, and told not what he had done, but had said it was the earthquake, and went away to sit at the feet of the gods. But Nzana went and patted the earthquake on the head, for she said it was dark and lonely in the soul of the earth. Thereafter, returning step by step, Chalcedony onyx, up the stairway of the gods, she cast again her golden ball from the threshold, afar to the blue to gladden the world and the sky, and laughed to see it go. And far away, Tragul, upon the utter rim, turned a page that was numbered 6 in a cipher that none might read. And as the golden ball went through the sky to gleam on lands and cities, there came the fog towards it, stooping as he walked with his dark brown cloak about him, and behind him slunk the night. And as the golden ball rolled past the fog, suddenly night snarled and sprang upon it and carried it away. Hastily Inzana gathered the gods and said, "The night hath seized my golden ball, and no god alone can find it now. For none can say how far night may roam, who prowls all around us and out beyond the worlds." At the entreaty of their dawn child, all the gods made themselves stars for torches, and far away through all the sky followed the tracks of night as far as he prowled abroad. And at one time Slid, with the Pleiads in his hand, came nigh to the golden ball, and at another Yoharneth Lahai, holding Orion for a torch. But lastly Limpang Tung, bearing the morning star, found the golden ball far away under the world, near to the lair of night. And all the gods seized the golden ball, and night turning smote out the torches of the gods, and thereafter slank away. And all the gods in triumph marched up the gleaming stairway of the gods, all praising little Limpang Tung, who through the chase had followed night so close in search of the golden ball. Then far below on the world a human child cried out to the dawn child for the golden ball. And Inzana ceased from her play that illumined world and sky, and cast the ball from the threshold of the gods to the little human child that played in the fields below, and would one day die. And the child played all day with the golden ball down in the little fields where the humans lived, and went to bed at evening and put it beneath his pillow and went to sleep. And no one worked in all the world because the child was playing. And the light of the golden ball streamed up from under the pillow and out through the half-shut door and shone in the western sky. And Yoharneth Lahai in the night time tiptoed into the room and took the ball gently, for he was a god, away from under the pillow, and brought it back to the dawn child to gleam on an onyx step. But some day night shall seize the golden ball and carry it right away and drag it to his lair, and Slid shall dive from the threshold to the sea to see if it be there, and coming up when the fishermen draw their nets find it not, nor yet discover it among the sails. Limpang Tung shall seek among the birds and shall not find it when the cock is mute, and up into the valleys shall go Umborodom to seek among the crags. And when the hound, the thunder, shall chase the eclipse and all the gods go seeking with their stars, but never find the ball. And men, no longer having light to the golden ball, shall pray to the gods no more, who, having no worship, shall no more be gods. These things be hidden even from the gods. From Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. When the gods slept. All the gods were sitting in Pagana, and their slave, Time, lay idle at Pagana's gate, with nothing to destroy. When they thought of worlds, worlds large and round and gleaming, and little silver moons. Then, who knoweth when, as the gods raised their hands making the sign of the gods, the thoughts of the gods became worlds and silver moons, and the worlds swam by Pagana's gate to take their places in the sky, to ride at anchor forever, each where the gods had bidden. And because they were round and big and gleamed all over the sky, the gods laughed and shouted and all clapped their hands. Then upon the earth the gods played out the game of the gods, the game of life and death, and on the other worlds they did a secret thing, playing a game that is hidden. At last they mocked no more at life, and laughed at death no more, and cried aloud in Pagana, will no new thing be? Must these four march forever round the world till our eyes are wearied with the treading of the feet of seasons that will not cease, while night and day and life and death drearily rise and fall? And as a child stares at the bare walls of a narrow hut, so the gods looked all listlessly upon the world, saying, Will no new things be? And in their weariness the gods said, Ah, to be young again, ah, to be fresh once more from the brain of Yana Yod Sushai. And they turned away their eyes in weariness from all the gleaming worlds, and laid them down upon Pegana's floor, for they said, It may be that the worlds shall pass, and we would fain forget them. Then the gods slept. Then did the comet break loose from his moorings, and the eclipse roamed about the sky, and down on earth did death's three children, famine, pestilence, and drought, come out to feed. The eyes of the famine were green, and the eyes of the drought were red. But the pestilence was blind, and smote all about him with his claws among the cities. But as the gods slept, there came from beyond the rim, out of the dark and unknown, 3 Yozis, spirits of ill that sailed up the river of silence in galleons with silver sails. Far away they had seen Yum and Gotham, the stars that stand stencil over Pegana's gate, blinking and falling asleep. And as they neared Pegana, they found a hush wherein the gods slept heavily. Ya, Ha, and Snurg were those 3 great Yozis, the lords of evil, madness, and of spite. When they crept from their galleons and stole over Pegana's silent threshold, it boded ill for the gods. There in Pegana lay the gods asleep, and in a corner lay the power of the gods, alone upon the floor. A thing wrought of black rock, and 4 words graven upon it, whereof I might not give thee any clue, even if I should find it. 4 words of which none knoweth. Some say they tell of the opening of the flower towards dawn, and others say they concern earthquakes among hills, and others that they tell of the death of fishes, and others that the words be these, power, knowledge, forgetting, and another word that not the gods themselves may ever guess. Those words the Yozis read and sped away in dread, lest the gods should wake, and going aboard their galleons bade their rowers haste. Thus the Yozis became gods, having the power of gods, and they sailed away to the earth and came upon a mountainous island in the sea. There they sat upon the rocks, sitting as the gods sit, with their right hands uplifted, and having the power of gods, only none come to worship. Thither came no ships nigh them, nor ever at evening came the prayers of men, nor smell of incense, nor screams from the sacrifice. Then said the Yozis, Of what avails it that we be gods, if none worship us, nor give us sacrifice? And Ya, Ha, and Snurg set sail in their silver galleons, and went looming down the sea to come to the shores of men. And first they came to an island where there were fisher folk, and the folk of the island, running down to the shore, cried out to them, Who be ye? And the Yozis answered, We be 3 gods, and we would have your worship. But the fisher folk answered, Here we worship Ram, the thunder, and have no worship nor sacrifice for other gods. Then the Yozis snarled with anger, and sailed away, and sailed till they came to another shore, sandy and low and forsaken. And at last they found an old man upon the shore, and they cried out to him, Old man upon the shore, we be 3 gods that it were well to worship, gods of great power, and apt in the granting of prayer. The old man answered, We worship Pegana's gods, who have a fondness for our incense and the sound of our sacrifices when it squeals upon the altar. Then answered Snurg, Asleep are Pegana's gods, nor will they wake from the humming of the prayers which lie in the dust upon Pegana's floor. And over them Snorokte, the spider of the worlds, hath woven a web of mist, and the squealing of the sacrifice maketh no music in ears that are closed in sleep. The old man answered, standing upon the shore, Though all the gods of old shall answer our prayers no longer, yet still to the gods of old shall all men pray here in Syrianus. But the Yozis turned their ships about and angrily sailed away, all cursing Syrianus and Syrianus' gods, but most especially the old man that stood upon the shore. Still the 3 Yozis lusted for the worship of men, and came on the third night of their sailing to a city's lights. And nearing the shore they found it, a city of song wherein all folks rejoiced. Then sat each Yosi on his galleon's prow, and leered with his eyes upon the city, so that the music stopped and the dancing ceased, and all looked out to sea at the strange shapes of the Yosis beneath the silver sails. Then Snurg demanded their worship, promising increase of joys, and swearing by the light of his eyes that it would set little flames to leap over the grass, to pursue the enemies of that city, and to chase them about the world. But the people answered that in that city men worshipped Agrodon, the mountain standing alone, and might not worship other gods, even though they came in galleons with silver sails sailing from over the sea. But Snurg answered, Certainly Agrodon is only a mountain, and in no manner a god. But the priests of Agrodon sang for answer from the shore. If the sacrifice of men make not Agrodon a god, nor blood still young on the rocks, nor the little fluttering prayers of 1,000 hearts, nor 2,000 years of worship, and all the hopes of the people and the whole strength of our race, then there are no gods, and ye be common sailors sailing from over the sea. Then said the Yosis, Hath Agrodon answered prayer? And the people heard the words that the Yosis said. Then went the priests of Agrodon away from the shore and up the steep streets of the city, the people following, and over the moor beyond it to the foot of Agrodon, and then said, Agrodon, if thou art our god, go back and herd with yonder common hills, and put a cap of snow upon thy head, and crouch far off as thou do beneath the sky. But if we have given thee divinity in 2,000 years, if our hopes are all about thee like a cloak, then stand up and look upon thy worshippers from over our city forever. And the smoke that ascended from his feet stood still, and there fell a hush over great Agrodon. And the priests went to the sea and said to the 3 Yosis, New gods shall have our worship when Agrodon grows weary of being our god, or when in some night time he shall stride away, leaving us naught to gaze at that is higher than our city. And the Yosis sailed away and cursed towards Agrodon, but could not hurt him, for he was but a mountain. And the Yosis sailed along the coast till they came to a river running to the sea, and they sailed up the river till they came to a people at work, who furrowed the soil and sowed and strove against the forest. Then the Yosis called to the people as they worked in the fields, Give us your worship, and ye shall have many joys. But the people answered, We may not worship you. Then answered Snurg, Ye also, have ye a god? And the people answered, We worship the years to come, and we set the world in order for their coming, as one layeth raiment on the road before the advent of a king. And when those years shall come, they shall accept the worship of a race they know not, and their people shall make their sacrifices to the years that follow them, who in turn shall minister to the end. Then answered Snurg, Gods that shall recompense you not, rather give us your prayers and have our pleasures, the pleasures that we shall give you, and when your gods shall come, let them be wroth, they cannot punish you. But the people continued to sacrifice their labor to their gods, the years to come, making the world a place for gods to dwell in, and the Yosis cursed those gods and sailed away. And Yah, the Lord of Malice, swore that when those years should come, they should see whether it were well for them to have snatched away the worship from 3 Yosis. And still the Yosis sailed, for they said, It were better to be birds than have no air to fly in, than to be gods having neither prayers nor worship. But where the sky met with ocean, the Yosis saw land again, and thither sailed. And there the Yosis saw men in strange old garments, performing ancient rites in the land of many temples. And the Yosis called to the men as they performed their ancient rites, and said, We be 3 gods, well versed in the needs of men, to worship whom were to obtain instant joy. But the men said, We have already gods. And Snurg replied, Ye too? The men answered, For we worship the things that have been, and all the years that were. Divinely have they helped us, therefore we give them worship that is their due. And the Yozis answered the people, We be gods of the present and return good things for worship. But the people answered, saying from the shore, Our gods have given us already the good things, and we return them the worship that is their due. And the Yozis set their face to landwards and cursed all things that they had been in all the years that were, and sailed their galleons away. A rocky shore in an inhuman land stood up against the sea. Thither the Yozis came and found no man, but out of the dark from inland towards evenings came a herd of great baboons and chattered greatly when they saw the ships. Thus spake Snurg to them, Have ye too a god? And the baboons spat. Then said the Yozis, We be seductive gods, having a particular remembrance for little prayers. But the baboons leered fiercely at the Yozis and would have none of them for gods. One said that prayers hindered the eating of nuts, but Snurg leaned forward and whispered, and the baboons went down upon their knees and clasped their hands as men clasp, and chattered prayer and said to one another that these were the gods of old, and gave the Yozis their worship, for Snurg had whispered in their ears that if they would worship the Yozis, he would make them men. And the baboons arose from worshipping, smoother about the face and a little shorter in the arms, and went away and hid their bodies in clothing, and afterwards galloped away from the rocky shore, and went and herded with men. And men could not discern what they were, for their bodies were the bodies of men, though their souls were still the souls of beasts, and their worship went to the Yozis, spirits of ill. And the lords of malice, hatred and madness sailed back to their island in the sea, and sat upon the shore as gods sit, with right hand uplifted, and evening foul prayers from the baboons gathered about them and infested the rocks. But in Pagana, the gods awoke with a start. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes are released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.